So the pattern that I'll be showing you how to strategize today is this showmanship pattern that I just made up. So the first direction is start at A and trot halfway to B, break down to a walk, walk to B. At B, trot around B to C. At C, back 1 horse length, turn 270 degrees, and then walk to the judge. Set up for inspection. After inspection, you do a 90 and trot off. So first of all, when figuring out a pattern, you want to think of your horse specifically. Patterns won't be successful for you if you plan it exactly the way it's written. Judges like to see that you're actively aware of your horse's ability and can accentuate the good and minimize the flaws. Personally, my horse is very well-mannered in showmanship, is respectful of my space, and can react quickly to my subtle movements. Our biggest flaw is that she pivots old style on her back left hoof. So first of all, when looking at this pattern, it's a preference whether you want to start with the nose, shoulder, or hindquarters at cone A. I would always recommend nose for most horses because most horses could always benefit from having an extra stride to get into the trot. With this being said, you must take each of your transitions with your horse's nose, even with your marker. So at B, your horse's nose is where you should start picking up your trot. The next thing in the pattern is that you need to transition down to the walk and then up to the trot again. I know that my horse can step down and back up within a stride, so I will only start cueing about a stride ahead of each of my markers. It's important to understand what your horse listens to the best. It's ideal for your horse to read your shoulders first so that they can see what you're cueing before your hand has to reinforce. If your horse is more high energy and cannot walk as well, pick up the trot slightly before B, so that way you minimize your time walking. If your horse has a nice, even, ground-covering walk, map out your space well and step off at the trot right when your horse's nose is at B to maximize your walking space, but still you want to keep your proportions about half. When preparing your trot around B, you're going to want to push your hand forward and extend your stride since you're running on the outside of the horse. That will mean that you're trotting faster than your horse is trotting. So when you step off, you're going to want to be ready to trot faster than you normally would on a straightaway, otherwise your horse will break. When trotting around the cone, you're going to want to trot straight first rather than trying to pick up a trot while making a turn. Once you're into a nice steady trot, you're going to make your loop around. You're going to want to plan your space around on this side of cone B with the same amount of space that you have on this side. Hi, future Emma here. So one thing I forgot to mention is that when you're trotting around B, you're going to want to look up around your turn and towards C, because you're going to want to find a perfectly straight line after you finish your curve around B towards C. A way to ensure that you have an even amount of space on each side of B so your loop isn't lopsided is to set up in an even space for your line from A. So your distance straight on from C should be the same distance on the other side of B next to A, where I wrote those two lines. If your horse has the tendency to break from the trot, plan for a bigger loop. Once you make it around the loop, you're trotting straight to C. It's important to understand how much space it takes for your horse to stop and plan accordingly. I know that my horse can stop pretty fast, so I'm going to start cueing right before C, but other people with horses that don't stop as fast should start cueing a little bit farther back. Now for the back. This part is tricky because so many things factor into the decision making for this part of the pattern. The directions say 1 horse length, but if we look ahead, after we back, we must pivot and then walk to the judge. Therefore, we must plan to back with our horse's hindquarters even with the judge, so after the pivot, we're set in a straight line. But also, plan for the type of pivot your horse has. My horse pivots on her back left hoof, so I'm going to take her just a little bit farther back than the judge because I know for my horse that will land me perfectly straight. If your horse walks forward out of pivots, plan ahead and back up more or less depending on which part of the pivot they tend to walk out of. This is why it's very important to practice showmanship and understand what your horse's capabilities are, because there are so many different combinations of behavior that would change exactly where you want to back your horse to. So even though the directions say 1 horse length, plan ahead to what your horse needs. After your pivot, walk straight to the judge. Again, if you have like a fine horse or something where you would need to do a little bit of stepping forward to set up and stretching out, stop earlier to leave yourself space. If your horse sets up with little movement, get closer to the judge and go for a nice clean stop with a nice setup. This will be a higher degree of difficulty, but if you get too close and the judge has to back up, it could easily become your flaw. So practice and do what you can. After inspection, don't rush your pivot. Get back into position with your horse and plan ahead, because even though it's a shorter pivot and might seem easier, it could so easily be overturned. So be cautious of how you go into your pivot and make sure your line is very straight, because the judge will very easily be able to tell. At the trot, pick a line straight ahead of you and do a head check behind you and go for your sharpest trot transition away from the judge. After a few strides, do another head check to make sure you're still on a straight line. By this point, the judge probably isn't watching you anymore, but it's important to make sure that you show your judge that you're still aware of your pattern. Another thing to note throughout this whole pattern is the speed and length of your stride. If you're showing specifically in Western, you're going to want to show off a lengthened stride, but a slower stride. If you're in saddle seat or hunt seat, you're going to want to trot a little bit at a faster pace and show off your horse's reach and length and stride. Now, after piecing all of this together, I will show you what it looks like to go through it with my horse.
So this video was taken from the judge's perspective. The first part of my video is overall pretty good. I'm coming around the turn now. At this part right here, you can kind of see she hesitated a little bit at the trot, because I practiced this pattern prior and she was anticipating the stop. She got a little bit crooked at the back, so I had to fix that up. So if you'll notice how I backed her a little bit farther past the judge, but then when I finish my pivot, I'm pretty much straight in line. My stop wasn't super clean. Next time I would have planned for something a little bit better. Her setup was okay. She got a little bit out of focus there. I think she was looking at something down the road. I probably should have gotten after her more. Overall, the accuracy and movement of the pattern was just fine, but I would have cleaned up some stuff a little bit with some practice. But that's all. Thank you for watching.